my main focus today is going to be looking at the work we're doing in our group. As mentioned in my introduction, one of my main areas is looking at artificial intelligence and both machine learning and optimization for sustainable development. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about what I mean by sustainable development. I think you know by now, my name is Nelishia Pillay. I'm based at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. So just a quick outline of the talk. So a lot of the work we do is linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. So when I first started working in AI and machine learning and optimization, I played a lot with publicly available data. And it was very interesting because you could try and test your techniques compared to other techniques. But where there was a gap was I couldn't see the impact or what this was doing in the real world and how it could actually be used to help in terms of quality of life, economic development, etc. And then the SDGs were defined and it opened a whole new world to work in. So I'm quickly just going to go through the Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 of them. I'll just do an overview. And for this talk, I'm going to focus on just 4 of them: SDG 2, SDG 3, SDG 4, and SDG 9. So that's zero hunger, health and well-being, education, quality education and lifelong learning. And then lastly, innovation and industry, which is one of the SDGs that we're doing a lot of work in. And there's a lot that we're doing, but I'm just going to focus on 2 optimization aspects. Some of the work that we're doing that looks specifically at optimization for scalable solutions. And a lot of the work that we're doing is also linked to machine learning. So whereas at some point, machine learning stood on its own, in this day and age, it needs optimization to drive it, especially to solve these problems linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. I'll then look at a few case studies and then pose some challenges. And the aim of those challenges is to see where we can find future research directions to take this. So if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they're very well published. There's 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has listed, and the aim is to try and achieve these goals by 2030. So if we look at what the aim of these goals are, I can, in my perspective, in 3 sort of main aims is basically we need a better quality of life, we need economic growth and development to sustain that better quality of life, and very importantly, we also need to ensure that in doing this, we also have some form of attaining equity, diversity, and inclusion, and equality for all, and no inequalities amongst people. So that's basically my perspective of the Sustainable Development Goals in a nutshell. Like I said, the 4 that I'm going to focus on today, is zero hunger. And these should just go a little bit to the side. So it's zero hunger, no poverty, good health and well-being, quality education, and then industry, innovation, and infrastructure and industry. So if we start with zero hunger, so generally the main aim behind zero hunger is looking at 2 aspects. One is agriculture and where we can make a difference in agriculture, and that's leading to food security. So a lot of the work that we've done has focused basically on agriculture, but there's things like nutrition that you can bring in, agriculture that will ensure that there is good food security in a particular country. So I'm going to touch on the agricultural aspects that we've looked at. Health and well-being, so this is basically across the board. And a lot of the work that we've done has looked at disease prediction, and these range from different diseases. So we're looking at both image data and quantitative data, things like diabetes, heart disease, depression, COVID, and more lately, things that are related to brain tumors, Alzheimer's, diseases like that. Quality education. So we want quality education, but we also want lifelong education. And one of the challenges is, again, accessibility. So we've been looking at things like learning analytics for prediction, but also an area which I'm quite passionate about, which is intelligent tutoring systems that help to provide individual learning, which you can learn in your own space and your own time, and in a way then contributes to lifelong learning. The area that we've been a lot of work, the SDG that we've linked a lot with. So one of the chairs that I hold is an industry-linked chair, and it's a link to a broadcasting industry in South Africa, where we do a lot of work to have an impact in that industry, and I'll speak a little about that a little later on. We also look at the standard type of things in industry, logistics problems, packing problems, So those are the three main areas that we focus on. So optimization for sustainable development, I'm going to look at it in two areas. The first is optimization for scalable solutions. So we need scalable solutions and we need sustainable solutions going forward, especially for the SDGs. There's lots of different types of optimization around, as I'm sure you know. We've worked a lot with evolutionary algorithms, but I'm going to look at one aspect when I speak about this. I'm not going to go over everything we've done, but the one that we feel that has been having an impact and has been helping us to scale is something called multi-space search, and the idea of looking at more than one space. So I'll present a lot on that. The other area where we're very active and where we feel it has an impact, sometimes optimization doesn't work well or doesn't work as well when you solve a solution directly. But if you actually use it to configure or design other techniques that can be used to solve solutions, and mainly machine learning techniques, sometimes the impact is actually better and the advantage is better. So I'm going to speak about that a little bit as well. So optimization used for machine learning. We do a lot of this in our group. And we look at the different types of machine learning, also the different designs of machine learning, ranging from automated configuration all the way to automated generation, automated composition. So I'll speak about some of the work that we've done in that area as well. So if you look at optimization for scalable solutions, traditionally, we work in a solution space. So whether you're dealing with using an evolutionary algorithm, whether you're using any other meta-heuristic, we're essentially working in a heuristic space. But solution space. I'm getting ahead of myself. But why not work in other spaces? And why would we want to work in other spaces? So the whole idea is that if you work in a solution space, there are always challenges. And we know with optimization techniques, we have standard challenges that prevent us from getting to where we want to get to in the solution space. The whole idea behind optimization is we have this whole huge space that we want to search. Generally, we can't cover the whole space, so we use heuristic or stochastic techniques to take us to particular areas of the search space and the areas that are promising. But there are challenges with working in such a space. I mean, we know there's premature convergence. You can get stuck in local optima. There's some areas of the search space that may not be accessible. And the way around this is actually to work in an alternate space and map across to the solution space. So some of the spaces that we've been working in, so the standard space is the solution space that we can work in. But like I mentioned, there's challenges. One of the spaces that we found very effective is the program space. Another space, which is more recent and is one of my passions, is the heuristic space, and that's the whole idea of hyper-heuristics. But then why work in these spaces in isolation? Because like you have problems with working in the solution space, at certain points you could be stuck in these other spaces as well. So why not look at working in multiple spaces at the same time to solve a problem? And this is something I'm quite excited about and something our group is working on a lot. So I'm going to speak about that in some detail. But firstly, I'm going to go through the different spaces. I'm not going to go into the solution space because we all know how that works. But I think people also have an idea of the program space, but I'm going to go through the program space a little bit, the heuristic space, and then finally multi-space search. But with all of this, I think we know with the optimization techniques, there are challenges in general besides things like local optima, this computational cost. There's not always being able to find as much data as you need. So the other thing that comes up when you're working in different spaces, how do you transfer knowledge between the spaces? And what we're doing a lot of is transfer learning. So we're looking at transfer learning for each of these spaces. So transferring between spaces, between solution spaces, between program spaces, between heuristic spaces. And we're also looking at transfer learning to transfer knowledge between the different spaces. So from a solution space to a program space, and from a solution space to a heuristic space, etc. So a lot of our work that we do in order to reduce costs, to transfer knowledge, reduce the amount of optimization that's been done is linked to transfer learning. New area that we are working in now, and we do have a library available, is automating the transfer learning. Because if you work in transfer learning, you know there's three big questions: what to transfer, when to transfer, and how to transfer. And actually finding answers to those questions that itself becomes an optimization problem that needs some type of optimization. So I'll speak a little bit about that as we look at the specific case studies for this. So if you look at the program space, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with genetic programming. That's one of my other favorite topics. My PhD was on genetic programming. And the whole idea is instead of finding a solution to the problem, you find an algorithm that will produce a solution. And in the way you assess these algorithms, you map to the solution space, and then you find some type of fitness measure that will map back. In addition to that, there's lots of other things that happen in the program space. You may not map directly to a solution space, but what you may do is you may generate models, you may generate classifiers. So you could find solutions in inverted commas that are actually programs. A lot of work done with symbolic regression, your solution and program is synonymous, and this is where GP plays a very good role. So the types of GP that we focus on, there's lots of GP. I mean, there's linear GP, there's Cartesian GP. So we've basically looked at grammatical evolution, and we've looked at grammar-based GP, and these are the two that we use mainly. Of course, we also use canonical GP, where it's not a variation, it's a standard GP. But a lot of the work that we do looks at creating the actual solutions themselves, where the solutions are synonymous to the program, so models, classifiers, where those are the solutions. We've done a little bit of work where we produce an algorithm that can create a solution, but our main focus is on where your solution and your program space is synonymous. Okay, the next type of space is the hyper-heuristic space, or the heuristic space. So hyper-heuristics are a fairly new concept. A lot of this work that we do is in collaboration with the University of Nottingham. So Edmund Burke actually coined this concept, and there's quite a big group that was working at Nottingham on hyper-heuristics. So the idea here, it's very similar to a program space. And in some cases, especially when you're dealing with generation hyper-heuristics, it's actually synonymous to the program space. So the idea here is you either select heuristics to create a solution or improve a solution, or you generate new heuristics to create a solution and improve a solution. And then you have a mapping from this heuristic space to a solution space. And usually you evaluate whatever's happening in the heuristic space, in the solution space, and you map that back. And that is how we assess how good what's happening in the heuristic space is. So there's essentially 4 types of hyper-heuristics. The first is selection constructive hyper-heuristics. And essentially selection constructive hyper-heuristics look at choosing constructive heuristics that can be used to create a solution. Selection perturbative hyper-heuristics basically look at, so now you've got an initial solution, you've either created it using a constructive heuristic or selection constructive hyper-heuristic, or you've randomly created it and now you want to improve it in some way. So the way you improve it is you use a selection perturbative hyper-heuristic that will choose essentially move operators to improve it. But for a lot of the domains, both our constructive heuristics and our perturbative heuristics have basically been human-derived. And some of the challenges with that is we can't think of all possible ideas. So there's some ideas that a heuristic technique can come up with to create a heuristic that we may not think of. But also to create heuristics, it's just time-consuming. For every different type of problem, we know about the no-free lunch theorem that the heuristics you use will be problem-dependent in terms of how well they perform or how appropriate they are. So automating these processes have led to generation hyper-heuristics. So a generation constructive hyper-heuristic creates a new constructive heuristics for a domain, and constructive heuristics that is, and a generation perturbative hyper-heuristic creates new perturbative heuristics. But what's exciting about the generation perturbative hyper-heuristic is these are essentially move operators that we use with all different types of search techniques, or different optimization techniques, whether they're single-point searches, whether they're multi-point searches. So you can do fantastic things. Sometimes those perturbative heuristics are actually meta-heuristics themselves, where you can look at hybridizing meta-heuristics or combining looking at making different changes in a meta-heuristic. I'm going to speak about a study we've done where we've actually created meta-heuristics using hyper-heuristics. So those are the different spaces, but why work in isolation? Because all spaces may have challenges. So can we actually work across more than one space when solving a problem? We've played with different techniques for this. So we've looked at doing this sequentially, and this is again some work that came out of initial work done at the University of Nottingham. We've also looked at interleaving this. And then we've also looked at automating the process, and I've called this concurrent, where we basically get a sequence that's then optimized that says when to switch to which search. But this all leads to the whole idea of multi-space searches. And what we found is determining when to switch between which search is itself an optimization problem. And I have a PhD student working on this, actually looking at when to switch between searches, but comparing various optimization techniques for deciding when to switch between the spaces. Okay, so optimization for machine learning. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of work that we do for optimization for scalable solutions, and also we want sustainable solutions. But the one that I'm more passionate about and excites me, and that is why I'm speaking about it, is the multi-space search. We do a lot of work on optimization for machine learning. And I'm just going to give you an overview. And a lot of this is linked to automated design. And if we look at the whole concept of automated design, there's automated algorithm selection, automated configuration, automated composition, and automated generation. We have focused on the last three, which are basically automated configuration, automated generation, and automated composition. And linked to this, we also look at automated hybridization. We've had a lot of interesting work on automated hybridization, both in hybridizing meta-heuristics and automating that process. We've also looked at more recently automating the process of automating different variations of genetic programming, because you have various different types of genetic programming, and they all aim to overcome some shortcoming of genetic programming. And we've basically shown that if you hybridize them, you end up with a better solution than if you look at them separately. So some of the work that we've been doing is automated design of pipelines, specifically one which I'm going to mention is a deep neural network pipeline, and then automated configuration of methods and neural networks and other machine learning techniques. So these are both search and machine learning techniques. I think there's a lot of work done on this. The whole concept of parameter tuning has been going on for a long while now, but we've looked at more recent techniques for this. And then automated generation, where either you come up with a new operator for a genetic algorithm, or you come up with new heuristics, you move operators, so that's automated generation. And then lastly, automated composition, which looks at, if you have a genetic algorithm, for example, we traditionally create an initial population, then it goes through the process of evaluating that population, creating new offspring. But is that control flow something that will always work? Can you change the control flow? Can you break down existing meta-heuristics to their components and recombine them in some way? Can you break down existing perturbative and constructive heuristics into their components and combine them in some way? So that's automated composition that we look at. Okay, so what I'm going to now look at are the case studies that we've done, and case studies for the 4 SDGs and the work that we've done in those case studies. So the first one is basically zero hunger. And there's 2 areas to this. And the one is basically food security and nutrition, and the other is agriculture. Sorry, and that's a spelling error there. There shouldn't be an A in the prediction. So the main area that we focused on is disease prediction in plants, and basically plants that form a source of food. So you've got maize, you've got soybean, you've got the different plants. And there's 2 areas we've looked at. So the one is basically diagnosing a disease. It does, so a lot of this is image-based work. Does the disease exist, or does the disease not exist? But the others are more detailed analysis. So for example, if you look at maize disease, they have these little pustules that actually form on the maize. And can you actually isolate them, count them? Because if you count them and you see how strong they are in their prominence, that will tell you how severe the disease is. So we've played with 2 areas there. And the work that we've done mainly with this, I'll speak about just now, is in design pipelines for this using optimization. And one of the interesting things that we found is a lot of existing data sets that you can use, and all the noise is taken out, and they're very neat, and it works very, very well. You'll get very, very good accuracies with that. But the challenge is dealing with in-field data. So if you actually get data from a greenhouse, for example, for maize diseases, or if you get data from some in-field, a field of wheat, etc., the challenge is dealing with those data sets because they're very, very noisy. So the work that we've done with this is we've automated the design pipeline. So essentially for segmentation and classification, what works well are your convolutional neural networks and your deep learning neural networks. But there's a challenge on choosing the different things and seeing right from the beginning where you've got your feature extraction, your processing of your images, all the way through as to which neural network to use, the design of that neural network. So that entire pipeline we automated, and we played with different algorithms for that. We played with genetic algorithms, but we also played with selection perturbative hyper-heuristics. And as the more and more I work with selection perturbative hyper-heuristics, the more and more I see its power, because what we were able to do with what we could do with the GA for automating this pipeline design, we could achieve the same with the selection perturbative hyper-heuristic and just a simple single point selection perturbative hyper-heuristic, but in much less time. So the power of selection perturbative hyper-heuristics for these different types of automating design, where you're mapping optimization onto machine learning to solve problems in machine learning, seems to be growing. Okay, so the other thing that came out of this is the whole idea of incremental learning in neural networks, and a project we're working on currently now is trying to optimize this. So what we said is, okay, these problems with infill data are very challenging. So maybe we divide the problem into easy data sets, medium data sets, and hard data sets. But then the challenge with that is what we think are easy, medium, and hard, the neural network doesn't necessarily think of as being easy, medium, and hard. And the idea is based on that you do an incremental approach that will actually lead to building up on your model as you go forward. So what we found there is we had to find ways of assessing how the neural network can or perceives in inverted commas easy, medium, and hard data, and then how we can then feed that into an incremental learning approach. And we needed some optimization to actually look at that. So the next one is basically good health and well-being. And we've looked at this basically in not only humans, but we've also looked at some work with animals with our veterinary science department at our university. The diseases, we've played with a lot of different diseases. So this ranges from COVID, heart disease, diabetes. If you look at the mental health aspects, we've been working a lot with depression and looking at depression diagnosis. The types of different things that we've done here. So one, we've used the same automated pipeline design for this, and we looked at automating that pipeline. Linked to that pipeline, especially for the work with veterinary science, is the X-rays are not very clear and they don't have a lot of data. So we had to play with ideas for generating data and using different techniques to generate data. And that was different from the standard, the other applications that we've used. Another area which has worked very, very well is sometimes you need different types of classifiers and you need to combine the power of classifiers. But deciding which ones are actually the right classifiers and deciding what are the right parameters for these different classifiers is also an optimization problem. And then we've looked at automated design of this. And here, essentially, we've looked at a GA, and a GA has done that quite well. For the automated design of the pipeline, we've played with different techniques. Like I mentioned, we played with GAs and we played with hyper-heuristics. And here, the hyper-heuristics, with different levels of optimization, we evaluated different levels of optimization. You can start off with something as simple as randomly deciding what to choose and accepting it only if it improves. You then can go to the next level where you have something like a choice function or reinforcement learning to choose what to use. And then your acceptance could be something as a threshold algorithm for working out acceptance, or you could take something from one of the existing meta-heuristics like Great Deluge, simulated annealing, the acceptance mechanisms, and build that in. And then, of course, the highest level is using something like of optimization is using something like a genetic algorithm. So for the deep learning pipelines, hyper-heuristics seem to work well. Ensembles, we needed more optimization there, so we used a genetic algorithm there. And a new idea which we're working on, well, actually it's not a new idea, but we're looking at optimization in this field. You actually learn better if you use different types of data. So some of the data can be images, some can be quantitative data, but how do you combine the learning from both the data together? And what we're looking at again is we're looking at optimization. And again, the two main techniques are hyper-heuristics and our standard evolutionary algorithms. Okay, so SDG 4, which is something I'm also passionate about, being in education myself, is the whole idea of looking at, we want quality education, but in addition to that, we also want to facilitate a culture of lifelong learning, because we never stop learning. As we move from one industrial revolution to the next, things change very rapidly, and we've got to relearn a lot of the time. Otherwise, what we do becomes redundant, and that leads to things like unemployment, etc. So the two main areas that we've been focusing on, the one is learning analytics. So a lot of the work that we do in this linked to this SDG is to help students achieve what they need to achieve. So the idea behind learning analytics is if you can predict beforehand what potential problems a student may have, then you can help put something in place to overcome that. So at our university, this is quite a big area. We actually have a division, education innovation, a subsection of that division actually focuses on putting these models in place and then calling students in based on where you have identified possible problems and to help counsel them so that they don't lead to failing if there's some indication that they could possibly fail or not be successful. So the two things that we are working with here is, and I'll speak about them later on in the slide, is one, we wanted models where we can see what's happening. So we use genetic programming for this. And we've had a project that was sponsored by our university to look at specifically genetic programming for this. And we've linked that to also explainable AI. In addition to that, we've also looked at designing, again, configuration of existing models like our black box models using optimization. The other area is the whole idea of intelligent tutoring systems. I think we all know, especially if you're in education, that intelligent tutoring systems, individualized tuition plays a big role. But one of the challenges is sometimes it's not economically feasible. Universities always don't have budgets for this. And the idea behind intelligent tutoring systems is to build an optimization and a machine learning into systems so that they can provide intelligent individualized tutoring. So there's a lot of work done in this area. A lot of it is in computer science because that gap, bridging that gap of getting it out there for someone that's not a non-computer science to use, that gap is still there. And that's one of the gaps we are trying to now fill. So a lot of the work we've done, especially with learning analytics, has been involving genetic programming, mainly because it's white box. Once you clean up the introns, or if you use something like grammatical evolution, then you can understand these models quite well. So the main area that we're focusing on here, we've actually put together a generic intelligent tutoring system, and it was piloted for a project that ran throughout Africa, and it was linked to the Center for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, basically dealing with people that have speech impediments, but also mental health issues, to provide an alternative way of communicating. And we set up an initial system for undergrad physiotherapists for intelligent tutoring systems. But taking that model and looking at that model, we've identified areas where we need to bridge that gap to automate the processes of producing an intelligent tutoring system to be used out there. So a lot of the work that we've been working on is automating and designing the NLP aspects of it using optimization, but also designing the intelligent tutoring system itself. So the intelligent tutoring system has a particular architecture, and there's a number of design decisions linked to that. So the last one where we're doing a lot of work is innovation in industry. So I'm just going to go through each of the different areas we've worked in, and then I'll discuss a little bit about the work we're doing in this. So the first one is linked to an industry which is one of our collaborators, essentially a broadcasting company, Multichoice in South Africa. And one of the projects we worked on was automating the process of thumbnail identification. And here we brought in some optimization to look at the feature extraction. So we looked at genetic programming for the feature extraction, but we also looked at automated design in terms of generating weights. So a little bit of neuroevolution. And what we looked at here, where we used the optimization, was one of the challenges with GAs, which are typically used for neuroevolution, is this a problem with the crossover operator. So we looked at optimization for creating new crossover operators for the problem. Another is creation of video shorts. So here we played with different ideas. Again, it was neuroevolution, and we've been looking at genetic programming essentially for coming up with a neural network that can actually do this, the CNN. But what we found is we need to bring structure into consideration. So we're actually looking at a new type of genetic programming that involves structures, so structure-based genetic programming. This seems to have had an advantage over canonical genetic programming. Intelligent archiving. So here we're using optimization basically in, again, the design. And there's three areas that we're looking at is basically configuration, composition, and generation for intelligent archiving. And we're looking at different techniques for this, where we use the optimization for that. Basically, the main optimization technique that we've been using is grammatical evolution. Movie scene scheduling. So here we've played with specifically hyper-heuristics that seem to work better than if you're working in the solution space. We also evaluated different new techniques for hyper-heuristics. So traditionally, for generation hyper-heuristics, genetic programming is used, and there's a variety of techniques used for selection hyper-heuristics, but we decided to see what the benefit of using ant colony optimization is. So we've done a lot of work with ant colony optimization, which has produced really good results for movie scene scheduling. So a lot of these projects, the first four that I was mentioning, is with collaboration with the industry that does a lot of sponsoring of our students' bursaries, etc. This has had a very good impact, and this hasn't been done before. So VMAF is just measure that was introduced by Netflix for identifying quality of videos. And the challenge with this is when you want to put it on, or when you want to apply it to a new set of videos, it's basically as a SVM as its backbone. You've got to reconfigure the whole thing. And here we automated that process, and we used optimization. We used a genetic algorithm for that. So recommender systems, we've done a number of different projects on recommender systems. So essentially combining optimization with reinforcement learning for recommender systems. We've also looked at using optimization to come up, specifically genetic programming again, to come up with measures for assessing the quality of recommender systems. So that's an ongoing project as well. And the work that we've done with neuroevolution and neural networks and using GP to come up with new operators has also been applied to recommender systems. A lot of work in packing problems and logistics. So we've also got a project, a collaboration with the University of Manitoba, where we've looked at coming up with a new framework for dynamic multi-objective optimization for logistics problems. There's a wide range of things that we've been doing here. So we've looked at coming up with a new way of learning a neural network, but using optimization to actually implement this, because the idea is instead of learning from one architecture, you learn from more than one architecture. But to manually decide what these architectures are that you learn from is not feasible. So we've used a genetic algorithm to decide what the architectures are and combine them into tuples for neural network learning. We've looked at automated transfer learning in neural networks using genetic algorithms and also Lamarckian evolution and comparing the both to see how well they work. And so there's a variety of different projects that we've looked at in this area. A project that we have with university in Mexico, we've looked at using optimization to come up with new meta-heuristics. So we've decoupled meta-heuristics into the existing components, and then we've looked at recombining them. And the applications here have essentially been continuous optimization applications rather than just discrete optimization applications. We've also done some work in hybridization, like I mentioned. So we'll be using optimization that's been essentially genetic algorithms and grammatical evolution to combine different meta-heuristics to solve problems and also different variations of genetic programming to solve problems. So that's all the work. Well, actually, it's not all the work. It's some of the work that I felt that was interesting that we've been working on in a nutshell. There are other projects we're working on and other techniques that we're working on. But for me, these are the ones I think I'm most passionate about and I enjoy speaking about. So that's why I've presented them. But like with everything we do, we don't have a perfect world. So there's always challenges. And I'm just going to highlight some of the challenges from a technical perspective, but also from bridging that gap of getting what we're doing out there so people can actually use it. So firstly, we know the problem with computational cost, and there's various ways around it. Optimization does always have computational cost associated with it. Like I said, one of the things we found power in is using a very simple hyper-heuristic that seems to achieve the same as a very strong optimization technique like a GA. There's things now that have come up that you can use where you can do fitness estimation. You can carry across the concept of transfer learning and surrogate models from neural networks to optimization now. And especially transfer learning has we've found a lot of work that has reduced computational cost because of transfer learning, both in terms of carrying models across, but also reducing the amount of data you need. And then automating that process using optimization has also proven to be very effective. This discussion has been going on for a while now, white box versus black box. And the whole idea of explainable AI it's still in its early stages, but it is very effective. While we definitely need it for black box. White box we generally find, but if you look at some of the optimization techniques, what they produce is not very readable. And there's also some explainability that we need to build in there. But also we've been using explainability to try and figure out what's actually happening in the optimization spaces. So we know how to improve our technique or what to do as well. So sometimes what's happening in the optimization space can in itself be a black box that we need to know about. So now we go to bridging that gap between what we're doing and taking it out there and getting it out there for people to use. And one is awareness. Awareness first in terms of what is there and what can be used for practitioners that need to use it. Awareness for the greater society out there to give you an indication that these things aren't things that you need to be afraid of. They're not going to take away jobs. So you don't get resistance from using whatever we develop. So those are the two main things. It's awareness, because you often find people sometimes, practitioners tend to use the wrong the wrong technique. If there's some hype about it, they just go ahead and use it. So I was chatting to somebody from an industry, from civil engineering industry, and because there was all this hype about deep learning at the time, he was telling me how they've used all these different neural networks and et cetera, et cetera. And actually neural networks weren't actually needed to solve their problem. They needed optimization. They needed something like a GA. So awareness both for practitioners, but also for the greater public, so they actually use what we're doing. And the major challenge that we've been having is both accessibility and infrastructure. So the whole idea behind using optimization for the sustainable development goals to try and attain them. But one of the development goals which we have a challenge with, and this is linked to the work that we've been doing with equity, diversity, and inclusion, is firstly, how do we make it accessible to the poorer communities, but how do we cater for diverse cultures, people with disabilities, etc. And this we need to actually keep in mind when we are developing our optimization techniques. So some of the things that we've been looking at is one of the challenges I think we all know with both machine learning and optimization is biases that can creep in. So we've been looking at techniques to try and overcome those biases or to try and reduce them to as large an extent as we can. But when we actually develop the systems, do we actually build in any measure that caters for equity, diversity, and inclusion when we evaluate them? We actually evaluate performance and we optimize for evaluating performance. But should we also be looking at optimizing in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion to try and reduce the inequality gap that our optimization techniques may create? And then linked to that is infrastructure, because you find different countries have different infrastructure and therefore can support different levels of attaining these development goals using optimization techniques. And I think we need lifelong infrastructure no matter which country you look at, and we need ways in which to do this. But this then leads on to my next point. We can't do this in isolation as academics. We need different stakeholders involved. So we need to bring in industry, but we also need people at government level to come in and also bring in academia. And I think merging these three together and having something that drives this from these three silos that tend to work in isolation, which we're now trying to reduce the gap. I mean, we've been doing a lot of work with collaboration with industries and industries sponsoring research that's of benefit to them. That gap needs to be reduced a lot quicker to have more impact with what we're doing.